Hello and welcome to another episode of The Garcias. I'm Pico, the son, pediatrician in training. And today with me are...
Grace, the mother dermatologist.
and,
Dennis, the father pediatric pulmonologist.
and today we'll be talking about medicine and being a doctor in the Philippines. So I guess the first question for mom and dad would be, why did you become a doctor? Anyone can answer first.
I've always been fascinated by the looks of a doctor, diba? With the coat and the respect they get from people. In the Philippines, doctors are generally respected in the community. But I guess the big deciding factor was when I got sick myself. When I was in grade 5, got sick with rheumatic fever, and I guess that intensified my desire to become a doctor.
Ako din, sickness ako. Had severe asthma all throughout my childhood, and tuwing makikita ko yung doctor ko, parang gumagaling ako. So, I want to be like that, na parang just because people see you, they feel better. So, that's what initially pushed me to become a doctor. Eh, ikaw? Gaya-gaya ka lang, no?
Kaya ako.
Family business.
Napunta sa akin.
Of course.
Ako, I became a doctor initially because it was the life I need. The model that my parents gave me was life of service, and it was not very bad. Again, for the reasons that they said, si Daddy, doctors are generally respected. It's a job of service, and of course, it helps pay the bills. Okay, the next question would be: Is it worth it? Is it worth it being a doctor in the Philippines in 2022, given the pandemic and all?
To answer that question, I guess we go back to the criteria of what makes things worthy. Is it the financial gains that you would get from it? Is it the feeling of personal accomplishment? Is it being able to help other people? Kasi if you just talk about financial gains, siguro the quick answer is no.
Yeah.
A lot of doctors are having a hard time. I know friends who would say that their income have been reduced to a tenth of their usual earnings
Because of the pandemic.
because of the pandemic. So if you just look at it from that point of view, sabihin mo, it's not worth it. Before kasi, you would think that being a doctor is a profession that's recession-proof, di ba? No matter how the economy is, your earnings would continue to remain steady at a certain point. Pero right now, you realize nobody anticipated the pandemic and nobody knew that a health-related event would affect the health workers. You would think that a pandemic would make us more in demand and make us earn more, di ba? Pero especially the pediatricians, kids not coming out and kids not getting sick, bumagsak talaga yung earnings namin. So if you just look at it from that aspect, sabihin mo, it's not worth it. But there are other things that makes a certain thing, a certain profession worthy. Siguro the opportunity to help in your own little way in those few moments that people do not understand the pandemic, do not understand COVID, and you're able to explain it to them, you're able to tell them the precautions, even if you're not earning out of those advices. Tell us if it's still worth it. And you start to think, it's not the number of patients I see. I can see 20 patients in a day, 30, 40, and at the end of it still feel useless. But at times like this, I may only need one single patient and say, I've had a good day. So it's still worth it.
Ako, I've always loved being a doctor. Pandemic, hindi pandemic. I always loved it. I still love it. I love being the person that people who are sick come to. And they enter the clinic, they are lost and afraid. And when they come out, because of the knowledge that you've given them, they feel hope. Dad has always accused me na, Ma, hindi lahat ng tao meant to be a doctor, so don't keep telling people to become doctors. But I think it's beautiful to be able to be the instrument of light in a patient's life na uncertain sila, natatakot sila, kinakabahan sila. And you are there to tell them whether, number one, their fears are valid, that this is something to be careful about, or it's something they don't have to be afraid of. Monetarily, siguro kasi medyo sa spiritual life namin, hindi siguro masyadong mahalaga yun, you know? Sinasalo naman tayo palagi eh. So, the money has become really secondary to it. It's just the satisfaction of being there, to be the instrument of light and of joy and of understanding. It's really worth it. Ewan ko lang dito sa in-training na to.
I think that for me, it's a difficult question to answer kasi because of the fact that I'm still in training,
Yes.
for one. I would say it's very difficult to become a doctor in 2022. Although, syempre, I already am a doctor, but I'm training to be a pediatrician. And given the institution where I work, I guess that has its connected challenges. I'm going through something right now, and so I have a difficulty answering that question. But I think one thing I know for sure is, at least with my convictions and with the way I prayed about whether or not to take this vocation, this life path, at least I'm convinced that God made me to be a doctor.
Amen. Thank you, Jesus.
Is it worth it? I think that bottles down, it boils down to the question of whether or not you're convinced that this life or this job is for you. I think that's what it boils down to.
Whether that's a vocation. Kasi I think most important thing about having a satisfying life is that you are super convinced that this is the reason why you were created for. This is your vocation. And it doesn't matter if you're paid, doesn't matter if you feel good. It's just that thing that God made you for. And that's where God wants to act in you dun sa profession na yun.
Pero I guess it's hard for Pico kasi it's in the thick of things.
Kasi
we always-
training kasi.
We always say in medicine, everything is clearer in retrospect.
In retrospect.
Yeah.
2020.
So right now, maybe it's hard to really give an honest opinion of whether it's worth it. Maybe when you're starting your practice
Yes.
already, that's when you're able to say or stop and ask, is it worth it? And then you're able to give a more accurate answer.
But also, I think, as with any profession, diba, when you're convinced that it's what you're made for, whenever you encounter a setback or a trial, if you're convinced that it's for you, then you just think of it as a setback or a trial that you get over. Versus if you're not convinced that it's not for you, then it might be a sign for you. You might take it as a sign that maybe I'm meant for something else.
Else. And I would be happy
Elsewhere.
somewhere else.
Yeah.
Our mentors would always tell us, go into something that makes you happy. The money would follow. Actually, they would say, we are there for the money. There are other professions that would
Yes,
give you
give you
money
better.
faster.
Better income.
So our last question would be, what advice would you give for the up and coming doctors, the aspiring doctors who might be watching the video?
You should have a very big why.
A very big one.
Why?
Why?
The motivation should be big enough to get you through the hardships of med school. Because if the why is
Shaky.
or too small, the struggles will always be bigger, the difficulties will always be bigger. But if you have a very big why, everything will be small in comparison to your why. Why are you doing it? Why would you want to be a doctor?
Ako, I still stand by being a doctor is one of the best things in the world. To be the person, as I said before, that people go to when they're lost. Physically, okay. They're lost physically. And to study so that you could give life. Siguro, that comes from the point of view of a person with severe asthma. Na kapag hindi ka makahinga, humahanap ka talaga ng somebody na makakatulong sa'yo. Kaya siguro yung motivation ko lang pag nag-doktor ako, kailangan malaman ko kasi may taong nangangailangan ng alam ko. And it almost feels like dapat hindi ka binayaran. Pero what a beautiful thing it is that you can give hope. I don't think any other profession gives hope the way doctors do. And that's why when there is somebody who wants to be one, I do everything I can to encourage that person. Kasi I've seen other friends in other professions. And in other professions, the hope can die out. Never does so with at least how I feel about it. So I really like to become a doctor. I want to be one. I'm grateful that I am one. The money is secondary to it, though it helps a lot. And it's a beautiful vocation.
Advice.
As a resident in training.
As a resident in training. I guess one of the advices is be prepared with a lot of patience for your patients. Training is difficult.
Yes, for
And
your
it takes a lot out of you.
consultants and your
For
co-residents.
consultants and your colleagues, and inevitably medicine is a practice of being with people and relating to them, whether it be your patients, your colleagues, your consultants. It's a people job, and and you have to be patient with people because it takes a lot to heal someone. Not just, that it could be there are different settings kasi, it could be an outpatient setting or patient could need surgery or whatever. But regardless of what the patient needs, it'll inevitably take something out of you. Your energy, your time, your emotions. And I guess you have to be prepared for that. Or you get trained to expand yourself to grow into that person. Like similar to what Dad said in one of our previous episodes.
I remember telling you before, one of the great sources of frustration for those who are in training is when you're not able to go home at the time you thought you would have been home. And I told you, one of the things you'll have to remember when you're in training is never set a time to go home. You stay in the hospital for as long as you have to stay. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for disappointment if you say, I'll do all my work so that I'll be home by 5 in the afternoon.
Okay.
It's great training for losing yourself.
That would be another blog.
It's another topic for another day. But for
Yes.
now,
But for
thank
now,
you for tuning in for this episode of the Garcia.
I hope you become a doctor.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.